The social worker's car was still idling in my driveway when my stepfather pulled up in his truck. He didn't get out right away, just sat there behind the wheel, engine running, watching through the windshield. I could see his face clearly from the porch. That expression, the one where his jaw goes tight and his eyes go flat. I'd seen it 1,000 times. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't the one who had to look away first. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this actually started. Back to the Tuesday morning in February, when everything I thought I knew about family got rewritten in about 4 minutes flat. My name is Leah. I'm 28 years old, and I spent most of my life believing that if you just kept your head down, stayed quiet, and didn't ask for too much, the people who are supposed to love you would eventually come around. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. That one most of all. My mother remarried when I was 9. His name was Gerald, and he came with a new house in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, a firm handshake, and a set of rules that applied to everyone except himself. My mother thought he was stability. I thought he was a stranger who reorganized our kitchen and threw away my drawings without asking. Both of us were right, depending on the day. My little sister, Penny, was born the year after the wedding. She was 7 years younger than me, which meant that by the time I graduated high school and started community college, she was still in elementary school, still small, still completely dependent on a household that I had very complicated feelings about. I moved out at 22, got a studio apartment on the east side of Columbus, worked double shifts at a diner, took online courses, built something small but mine. I visited on Sundays. I brought Penny her favorite chocolate croissants from the bakery on 5th, and I tried not to notice how quiet she got whenever Gerald was in the room. I noticed anyway. I always noticed. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February. My mother's voice on the phone, strange and thin. She said there had been an accident. Gerald's contracting business had been under investigation for months. Something about falsified permits, underpaid workers, a lawsuit from a developer in Westerville. I didn't fully understand all of it. What I understood was the part where she said the accounts were frozen, the house was mortgaged twice over, they were filing for bankruptcy. And then the part I really wasn't prepared for. She said Gerald thought it would be best if Penny came to stay with me for a while, just until things settled down, maybe a couple months. She said it like she was asking me to watch a houseplant. Penny was 15. I asked how long a while meant. My mother said she wasn't sure. I asked if Penny knew about this plan yet. She said they hadn't told her. I asked if anyone had thought about what Penny might actually need in the middle of all this, and my mother said I was being dramatic, which is the thing she always said when I asked a question she didn't want to answer. That afternoon, Gerald drove Penny to my apartment with one duffel bag and a garbage bag full of winter clothes. He carried the garbage bag up my stairs and dropped it by the door. He didn't come inside. He ruffled Penny's hair in a way that looked more like habit than affection, said, "Be good," and left. Penny stood in the middle of my studio apartment and looked around. The whole place was maybe 400 square feet. One bed, one pull-out couch, one bathroom with a shower head that had been threatening to fall off for 6 months. She was 15 and someone had just handed her a garbage bag and driven away. She didn't cry. She just looked at the pull-out couch and said, "Is the bar in the middle as bad as it looks?" I said yes, probably, and that I'd get her a mattress topper. She nodded like that was a completely reasonable answer to a completely reasonable situation and started unpacking her garbage bag. I had to go in the bathroom and run the faucet so she couldn't hear me. My mother's $200 Venmo transfer came 3 days later. No message. Just the money. I did the math the same way I'd done it 100 times before in my life. Slowly, unhappily, in a way that didn't add up no matter how many times I tried. 2 people. My current income from the diner, about $1,800 a month after taxes, sometimes less. My rent was $837. Utilities ran about $140. That left around $785 for food, transportation, Penny's school supplies, her health insurance copays, everything, per month. For 2 people, $200 from my mother was not going to move those numbers in any meaningful direction. I picked up a second job. Grocery store, 5 a.m., stocking shifts 3 days a week. I'd get home at noon, sleep for 2 hours, then go to the diner for the dinner rush. Penny started making dinner on the nights I worked late. She wasn't a great cook, which she knew, and she didn't pretend otherwise. One night I came home to pasta. She'd slightly overcooked and a handwritten note that said, "Sorry it's a little mushy, I followed the box, I swear." That note is still in my kitchen drawer. I tried calling my mother every few days. She answered about half the time. When she did, she mostly talked about the legal situation, about Gerald, about stress levels I couldn't understand because I wasn't there. I tried once to explain what our budget actually looked like. She said she'd sent money. I said $200 didn't cover much of a 15-year-old's life. She said I needed to be patient and that she had a lot going on. I said I knew. I said I wasn't angry. Neither of those things were completely true. By week 3, I stopped expecting her to call back. My savings account had $340 in it, which sounds small because it was. I'd been trying to build it up slowly, the way you do when you don't make much and emergencies keep eating into it. A car repair the previous fall had taken most of it. I hadn't fully recovered. Penny needed new shoes because her left sneaker had a hole in it that she'd been covering with a piece of duct tape on the inside. She hadn't told me about the shoes. I found out when I saw the duct tape sticking out from her sock one morning. I drove her to the Goodwill that weekend and told her to pick whatever she wanted. She found a pair of barely worn Nikes in her size and held them up like she'd found buried treasure, which in Goodwill terms, honestly, she had. They were $7.99. She offered to put them back if they were too much. I said they were not too much. She wore them home. She was so happy about those shoes that it made me want to sit in the parking lot and cry. I waited until I was back inside the car. The hardest part wasn't the money, though the money was hard. The hardest part was watching Penny navigate a situation that no 15-year-old should have to understand. Her friends were dealing with things like which group to sit with at lunch and whether to try out for the spring play. Penny was helping me spreadsheet our grocery budget and apologizing every time she ate the last of something. She started apologizing for her own hunger. That's when I knew I had to do something different, not just survive the situation, but actually change it. The idea started the way most good ideas do, not as an idea, but as an accidental observation. My diner shift ended at 10 p.m. most nights, and I walked home when the weather allowed because gas was expensive. One night, passing the strip of restaurants on Broad Street, I saw the Italian place, Corso's, doing their nightly cleanup. A line cook was hauling out containers of food, bread in a crate, soup in sealed buckets, a tray of roasted vegetables that looked like it had never been touched. I stopped and watched. Not in a weird way, just I couldn't move. I knew exactly how much that food would feed us, and I knew it was going into a dumpster behind a restaurant 6 blocks from my apartment. The cook noticed me staring. He looked about my age, with a blue bandana around his head and flour on his jacket. I apologized for being weird about it and asked if that food was still good to eat. He said most of it, yeah. Health code stuff. Time-sensitive inventory. He shrugged in a way that said he'd had this feeling plenty of times himself. I asked if there was any way I could take some of it instead of it being thrown out. He hesitated. Went back inside. Came out 2 minutes later with a manager who looked at me like I was either very enterprising or very desperate. Probably both. I explained quickly that my sister was 15 and staying with me and we were tight on money and that I hated the idea of food going in the trash when people needed it. The manager, his name was Russell, I learned later, and he'd run Corso's for 11 years, looked at me for a long moment. Then he said he couldn't just hand out food without some kind of formal arrangement. Liability. I said I understood. He said if I could figure out a way to make it official, he'd talk to me again. He handed me 2 containers of minestrone and a loaf of ciabatta and told me to come back when I had a plan. I went home and fed Penny soup and bread at 10:45 on a Wednesday night, and she said it was the best thing she'd ever eaten, which was probably an exaggeration, but I was too tired and too grateful to argue. The library became my office. 3 days a week after my morning stocking shift, I'd go in with my phone in the notebook and research. Food rescue organizations, liability waivers, Ohio's Good Samaritan food donation laws, which I had not previously known existed and which are actually pretty comprehensive if you understand what you're reading. I borrowed books I couldn't afford to buy. I printed documents on the library's 15 cents a page printer and taped them together at home because I couldn't afford more paper. Penny thought I was studying for a certification exam. I let her think that for a while because I didn't want to get her hopes up about something I wasn't sure would work. The person who changed everything was a woman named Claudette Osei. She ran an outreach program out of a Baptist church on the Near East Side, the kind of place that had been quietly feeding people for 30 years without anyone writing an article about it. She was in her mid-60s. With reading glasses she kept on a chain around her neck, and the specific kind of patient authority that you only develop by being right about things so many times that you stop needing to prove it. I walked into her church office on a Thursday afternoon with a folder of printed papers and a pitch I'd rehearsed 8 times in my car. I told her everything. Gerald. Penny. The restaurant food. My idea to create a formalized food recovery system, collect surplus from restaurants, and distribute it through a central location to families who needed it. I told her I had no money, no nonprofit status, no legal standing, and exactly one restaurant contact who had said, "Come back when you have a plan." She listened without saying anything until I finished. Then she took off her reading glasses, let them hang on their chain, and said, "You know what your problem is?" I said I had several. She said, "You've got the right idea and you're treating it like a secret. Stop that." Then she offered me the use of the church's commercial kitchen, already licensed, already inspected, as a staging area for distribution. She said her network of church volunteers could help with pickup and delivery logistics. She said she'd been trying to start something like this for 2 years but didn't have anyone with the energy to run it. I almost cried in her office. She handed me a Kleenex from the box on her desk without making it a moment, which I appreciated more than I can explain. By the end of week 5, I had a formal food recovery arrangement with Corso's, a letter of support from Claudette's church, and a liability waiver that her church's attorney had reviewed for free as a pro bono donation. I had a name for the operation, Carry Forward, because that felt right, and a distribution day every Saturday morning out of the church annex. Penny officially became my logistics coordinator. Her handwriting was better than mine, which she pointed out accurately and without any false modesty, so she made all the labels for the containers. She created a simple tracking sheet on a legal pad, what came in, what went out, what was left over. She did this the way she did most things, seriously and without complaint, like it was just obviously the right thing to do. The first Saturday, 12 families came. The second Saturday, 19. By the 4th week, we had a waiting list. I went back to Russell at Corso's and asked if he had any other restaurant contacts who might want to partner. He gave me 3 names. I went to each one in person, with my folder and my letter from Claudette and my now slightly more confident delivery, and all 3 said yes within 2 weeks. Word travels fast in the restaurant industry, it turns out, especially when you're offering to solve a problem they already feel bad about. I still hadn't told my mother what I was doing. She'd sent another $150 in week 6, again no message. I texted to say thank you. She sent back a thumbs up emoji. The thumbs up emoji is going to live in my memory forever. Week 7 brought a complication. A neighbor of the church, I will never know who, filed a noise complaint, which led to an inspection visit, which led to a city official informing Claudette that our distribution operation had outgrown the informal arrangement and now technically required a separate food establishment permit. The fee was $325. We also needed to register as a nonprofit to receive any future grant funding, which cost another $150 in filing fees, $455 total. I had $83 in my account. I sat on the church steps after the official left and stared at the parking lot for a while. Claudette came and sat beside me. She didn't say anything about opportunities wearing ugly masks, though she probably could have. She just sat there with me, which was what I actually needed. Then she said, "You need people to know what you're doing." I said I didn't really want to be a story. She said, "Honey, you already are one. You're just not getting any benefit from it." I called the Columbus Dispatch the next day. A features reporter named Janet Park had been covering local community initiatives for 3 years, and she picked up on the second ring. When I explained the situation, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I come by Saturday?" The article ran the following Thursday. The headline was something about a 28-year-old who turned a family crisis into a city food rescue network, which made me sound more organized than I actually was, but I wasn't going to argue with it. The response was faster and larger than I expected. Donations came in online, small ones mostly, $10, $25, and $50, but there were a lot of them. A local credit union called to offer a matching gift program for the first 30 days. A woman who ran a catering company on the north side of Columbus reached out to offer her licensed commercial kitchen for our use 2 evenings a week at no charge. A law firm downtown said they'd provide ongoing pro bono legal support for the nonprofit filing. Within 10 days of the article, we had enough to cover the permits, the nonprofit fees, and 3 months of basic operating costs. Penny read the article so many times she could quote parts of it. She was very casual about this. She didn't want me to know how proud she was, which meant I could see it from approximately 40 feet away. What I didn't know, what I found out later, was that the article had been shared in a private Facebook group for families dealing with financial hardship in Central Ohio. And from there, it had spread further. And somewhere in that spreading, it had reached someone who recognized the name Leah and the description of a little sister named Penny and a stepfather named Gerald, and put those pieces together into a picture she recognized. My mother's best friend Diane saw the article. And Diane, who had known me since I was 9 years old and had quietly disagreed with my mother's choices for at least half of that time, did something I didn't ask her to do. She called Ohio's Children's Services and told them that a 15-year-old girl had been dropped off at her half-sister's apartment 6 weeks ago with a garbage bag of clothes and no formal custody arrangement, no documentation, no plan, and no follow-up. I didn't know any of this until a caseworker named Ms. Tran called me on a Thursday afternoon to schedule a home visit. She was kind, businesslike in the way that good social workers are. Not cold, but efficient. Focused. She came to the apartment, looked at how we were set up, talked to me, talked separately to Penny. She asked questions I answered honestly. Yes, Penny was living with me. No, there was no formal custody agreement. No, I hadn't received consistent financial support. No, I didn't know what the long-term plan was. She thanked me and said she'd be in touch with my mother. My mother called me 20 minutes after that conversation. She wasn't furious exactly. It was worse than furious. It was the voice she used when she wanted me to feel like the problem. Measured, disappointed, sighing. She said she couldn't believe I'd involved the state in a family matter. I said I hadn't called anyone. She didn't believe me. She said she was dealing with enough and that I was making things harder. I said I was doing my best with a 15-year-old and no support, and she said she had sent money, and I said yes. $350 over 6 weeks for 2 people is definitely money, and we both went quiet. Then she said she was coming home. Not from a vacation, she and Gerald hadn't been anywhere, just home from wherever she'd been. Emotionally, I suppose, coming back to Columbus to sort this out. Her words, I said okay. I hung up and Penny appeared from the other room, where she had definitely been listening, and said, Is she coming here? I said yes. Penny looked at me for a second, then nodded once, the way she'd been doing all along, that composed, too old way of hers that made me want to go back in time and make things easier for her. Then she went back to updating the carry-forward tracking sheet because she was Penny and there was work to do. The Saturday before my mother's visit, something happened at distribution that I wasn't expecting. An older man named Harold, regular volunteer, retired postal worker, the kind of person who shows up 15 minutes early every single week, pulled me aside before we started. He said he'd worked with a lot of community organizations over the years. He said what we built in 8 weeks was something real, and that he'd seen things like this fall apart because the person running them ran out of steam. He asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He looked at me the way people look at you when they know you're lying but they respect you too much to push it. He said, You don't have to be fine, you just have to keep showing up. I think about that a lot. My mother came on a Sunday. She drove herself, which surprised me. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, like the last 2 months had taken something out of her that she hadn't fully accounted for. She stood in the doorway of my apartment and looked at the space. The pull-out couch that was now Penny's actual bed with a real mattress topper. The whiteboard on the wall where Penny and I mapped out the weekly distribution logistics. The folder of nonprofit documents on the kitchen table. And something moved across her face that I couldn't quite name. Penny came out of the bathroom and stopped when she saw her. They looked at each other for a moment. My mother said, Hey, baby. Penny said, Hi. That was the whole exchange. But there was something in it. Something careful. We sat down. I made coffee. My mother asked about school, which Penny answered politely. She asked about the food program, which I explained briefly. She picked up the newspaper article that was still on the counter, read it without saying anything, put it back down. Then she said, I should have called more. I waited. She said, I thought you could handle it. I told myself you were always so capable. I said, I'm 28. I'm not supposed to be the backup parent. She didn't argue with that. She just looked at the table. It wasn't an apology. Not quite. But it was the closest thing to one I'd heard from her in a long time, and I was tired enough that I let it count for something. The custody situation got resolved over the following 3 weeks. Nothing dramatic, No courtroom moments, just paperwork and caseworker meetings, and my mother agreeing to formal temporary guardianship arrangements while she and Gerald figured out the longer-term picture. Children's Services monitored things for 90 days. My mother started calling every Sunday, which she hadn't done before. Not every call was comfortable. Some of them were actually kind of normal, which was its own strange thing to adjust to. Gerald never came back to the apartment. I don't know what he said to my mother about all of it. I didn't ask. Carry Forward received its official nonprofit status 11 weeks after I first walked into Claudette's office. We now operate out of the catering kitchen on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, with Saturday distribution at the church annex. We partner with 14 restaurants in central Columbus and serve over 90 families weekly. We have 23 regular volunteers, including Harold, who has never once been anything other than exactly on time. Penny is still with me. We're figuring out what that looks like longer term. She's got another year of high school in Columbus, and honestly, I think she'd rather stay. I'm not going to pretend that's simple or that I always know what I'm doing. But she makes dinner on Tuesdays. She's gotten better, by the way, though she'll deny it. And she still runs the tracking sheet, and sometimes in the evenings when it's quiet, she'll just come sit at the kitchen table while I'm doing paperwork and neither of us has to say anything. Those are the moments I didn't know I was fighting for. I just knew I was fighting. The night my mother showed up after she left and Penny was asleep, I went and sat in the kitchen by myself. On the table was the garbage bag Penny had arrived with. I'd never thrown it away, I'm not sure why. It was empty by then, all her things properly put away in the dresser we picked up from the Facebook Marketplace for $35. I looked at that garbage bag for a while. I keep it folded under the kitchen sink now. Not out of bitterness. I'm past that, mostly. But as a reminder that the people who are supposed to show up sometimes don't, and that the gap they leave is exactly the size of the thing you build to fill it. A reminder that a 15-year-old with duct tape in her sneaker and a legal pad and her sister's back is more resilient than anyone who dropped her off that day could have imagined. A reminder that sometimes the least impressive starting point becomes the most important one. My mother saw a daughter who'd survived without her help. What made her quiet, what I watched settle over her face when she read that newspaper article, wasn't guilt exactly, though that was probably in there. It was the specific look of someone realizing that their absence didn't stop anything. It just meant they missed it. Some things cost more than a thumbs up emoji, and some things are worth a whole lot more than anyone thought to offer you. Thank you so much for listening. More stories are already on your screen. Click one now. I'll see you in the next one. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that February. Not in a cosmic sense, not in any kind of the universe was testing me way. I don't really talk like that. I mean it in the plainest, most practical sense. Things happen because other things happened first. Gerald's choices set off a chain. My mother's silence extended it, and every single decision I made inside that chain either made things worse or made them better. There was no neutral. There never is. What I know now, that I didn't fully understand at 28, is that the people who hurt you are usually not thinking about you at all. Gerald didn't drop Penny at my door because he wanted to damage her. He did it because he was in survival mode, and she was a problem he needed to move off his list. My mother didn't go quiet and send thumbs up emojis because she didn't love us. She did it because she'd spent so long depending on someone else to handle hard things that she'd genuinely lost the muscle for it. Understanding that didn't make it okay. But it made it less personal, and that mattered more than I expected. Penny taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn. She showed up with a garbage bag and duct tape in her sneaker, and she never once made her situation into an identity. She just kept going. She made mushy pasta and apologized for it, and the next time made it a little less mushy. She ran logistics for a food rescue operation at 15 like it was the most natural thing in the world because someone needed her to, and she decided that was enough reason. That's not something you can teach a person. That's something a person already has, and either the people around them help it grow, or they don't. I think about the version of me that could have just been angry. I had every right to be. I could have let Penny stay and done the minimum, kept my head down, resented every sacrifice quietly until it calcified into something permanent. A lot of people do that. I understand why. It's exhausting to keep choosing to do more when less was already forced on you. But I've learned that resentment only moves in one direction, and it's never outward, no matter how much it feels like it should be. It just settles into you. It changes the way you talk to people, and the way you make decisions, and eventually the way you see yourself. I didn't want that. I wanted to be someone Penny could look at and think, okay, this is how you handle something that isn't fair. Claudette told me to stop treating what I was doing like a secret. That advice applies to more than food rescue programs. There's a version of surviving hardship where you carry it alone because asking for help feels like admitting defeat. And there's a version where you say out loud what you need and let people decide whether to show up. The second version is harder to start and easier to sustain. I know that now. My mother is not fixed. I want to be honest about that. She's trying in ways she wasn't before, and I'm choosing to let that count for something because the alternative is holding a position forever that costs me more than it costs her. That's not forgiveness as performance. That's just arithmetic. Penny still runs the tracking sheet. She's gotten good at pasta. Gerald is somewhere I don't think about much anymore. And the garbage bag is under my kitchen sink, folded up, doing nothing, which is exactly what it deserves.